At the opening of 20 CE, Drusus found himself the new heir apparent to the increasingly withdrawn Tiberius. Young and inexperienced, the green scion of the Julio-Claudian dynasty was ill-prepared to take on the responsibility of rulership over an empire which spanned 3 continents. Thankfully, Drusus had a former mentor to guide him. Yet, in a typical fashion of cutthroat Roman politics, that friend would soon turn against him in the contest for the future of the empire. Welcome to our latest video on the history of Rome's Julio-Claudian family, in which we will explore the life, career and downfall of Seianus, the prefect to the Praetorian Guard who almost took down one of the most powerful families in the ancient world. Do you know why thousands of people on YouTube and Patreon support us financially? Because they get history you won't find anywhere else. We release 3 new exclusive videos every week. Plus, they get perks like early access to all videos, voting rights on upcoming series and videos, access to our private Discord, our production schedule, and much more. Right now, 250 exclusive episodes are waiting for members and patrons, including from our series on the Eastern Front of World War II, Spanish War of Succession, the Punic Wars, the Pacific War, the Iberian Reconquista, the Russian Revolution and Civil War, the North African and Italian campaigns of World War II, Sicilian Wars between the Greeks and Carthaginians, and many others. By joining, you're not only unlocking rare content, you're also supporting the stories you love. Your help allows us to keep producing 3 free videos per week while paying our team competitive salaries and growing the channel. Join via the links in the description, the pinned comment, or by pressing the join button under the video. Thanks for making this possible. After the untimely death of Emperor Tiberius's elder son, Germanicus, his younger brother Drusus was left alone as the heir to the empire, having been elevated to consul for a second time alongside Tiberius in 21 CE. Drusus's oversight of the Senate faced many of the same challenges as Tiberius's, where the influence and prestige of his name swayed the Senate to side with the opinions of the heir apparent, rather than make decisions based on details relevant to the issue. However, unlike his father, Drusus was present in the Senate and participated actively in debates, hearings, and legislation in a way Tiberius had withdrawn from. His handling of disputes, such as that between Gnaeus Domitius Corbulo and Lucius Cornelius Sulla, gained him supporters, and his popularity rose even further after he curtailed the false charges of majestas levied against various senators. By the end of the year, he was awarded tribunician power, which elevated him to the same station as Tiberius, an honour which had never been granted to Germanicus. However, Drusus's rise was not without opposition, as he would soon meet a fate much like his brother Germanicus at the hands of Tiberius's new partner in rule, Lucius Aelius Seianus. The Roman historian Tacitus provides ample detail about Seianus' origins and rise to power, stating that he was born in Volsini to the equestrian gens Seia in 20 BCE. His grandfather had been married to the sister of Gaius Calenius Maecenas, who was a powerful ally of Augustus, connecting him to the uppermost echelons of Roman society and paving the way for him to catch the future princeps' eye. Early in life, Seianus was adopted into the consular family of the gens Aelii, and was likely the nephew of Junius Blasius, who would win a triumph for his defeat of the revolt of Tacfarinas under Tiberius's rule. His father, Strabo, rose to power through Maecenas' connections, bringing him to Augustus's attention, who made him prefect of the Praetorian Guard. During this time, Seianus followed his father and the Praetorians around the empire, accompanying Augustus's adopted son, Gaius Caesar, to Armenia in 1 BCE. He was subsequently appointed prefect in 14 CE, as his father stepped down to take up the governorship of Egypt. Seianus then initiated a series of reforms within the Guard, consolidating its loyalty by appointing its officers, which Tiberius approved based on his recommendations. Seianus also moved the Guard from its quartering in houses across Rome into an encampment outside the city, raising the number of cohorts from 9 to 12, and reducing its commanding officers from 2 prefects to himself alone. The feud between Seianus and Drusus may have had its origin as early as 15 CE, when the Praetorians clashed with claqueurs in a riot in the city's theatres. Over time, Seianus' influence with Tiberius continued to grow, eventually reaching its first major head when, in 20 CE, he was allowed to betroth his daughter Junilla to Claudius Drusus, son of the future Emperor Claudius, which aroused backlash in the Senate, as Seianus was only of equestrian status and considered unworthy of joining his bloodline to that of the imperial family. However, the young Claudius Drusus choked to death mere days later, temporarily quelling the Senate's fury. Nevertheless, outrage was stoked again when Tiberius sought to appoint the governor of Africa the next year, selecting Quintus Blasius over Marcus Lepidus, due to his relationship with Seianus. The next year saw further acclamations bestowed upon Seianus, as he was granted a statue in the rebuilt theatre of Pompey, in which he and the Praetorians had combated the fire that destroyed the previous structure. However, in 22 CE, he and Drusus came to a head, when Drusus punched Seianus in the face during a heated argument in response to Tiberius's recent acclamation of Seianus as Socius Laborum, or ally in the emperor's toils. However, it was not personal enmity that would lead Seianus to murder Drusus, but greater ambition. The exact motivations which led Seianus down the path of political assassination are unclear. While Seianus' own personal ambitions were an obvious driving force behind his rapid rise, the question remains whether he was an independent political actor with his own agency, or was merely a pawn of Tiberius used in the political games between Agrippina and Livia Drusilla. However, modern scholars believe he was no one's puppet, but a player in his own right. Many of Tiberius's maestas accusations may have been instigated by Seianus to remove potential rivals or opponents to his rise to power, with Tiberius all too willing to accept them. Seianus, unable to rule as an equestrian, had conceived for himself the role of regent over a young child emperor, secured in position through marriage into the imperial family. In order to maneuver himself into this position, Seianus knew that Rome's present heir apparent needed to be removed. Moreover, Tiberius's retreat to Campania had given Seianus every indication that he might soon retire and pass on the mantle of princeps to Drusus if he did not move quickly. While Nero Caesar and Drusus Caesar, the sons of Germanicus, would not make sufficiently pliable puppets in Seianus' eyes, the sons of Drusus were viable for him to rule over. Seianus may have enticed Drusus' wife, Livilla, through the promise that her sons would succeed over Germanicus' children. Thus, Seianus divorced his wife, Apicata, and involved the doctor of Livilla, a certain Eudemus, in securing the poison, which was successfully administered to the heir to the empire. Tiberius himself was left stunned at his younger son's death, wearing a very opaque public mask over his emotions. Unlike Germanicus, Drusus was given full funerary honours. After the demise of yet another heir apparent, Nero Caesar and Drusus Caesar were brought before the Senate and placed under its care, now expected to assume the mantle of imperial responsibility. The people of Rome were not pleased with Drusus' death. Still, it was overshadowed by their delight that the house of Germanicus had returned to the forefront, pushing their mother, Agrippina, back into a newfound position of power. Nero Caesar was then married to Drusus' daughter, Julia Livia, to unite the family, but it would prove futile against Seianus' schemes. Seianus was able to capitalize on Livia Drusilla's hostility towards Agrippina, with him, Livia, and Livilla going before and instilling suspicion in Tiberius. At the beginning of 24 CE, Tiberius was quick to denounce Nero and Drusus Caesar as his equals when the pontifices offered their customary vows and asked if Agrippina had coerced them into the act. Charges of maestas were also brought up against the associates of the late Germanicus, who had stayed loyal to Agrippina, and the year 24 saw a major purge of notable senators and equestrians, instigated by Seianus. However, Seianus overstepped when, in 25 CE, he sought to settle the matter of marriage to Livilla, writing to Tiberius requesting his blessing to take her hand. Tiberius's response was plain, stating that Livilla would never take an equestrian in marriage, and the Roman aristocracy would be incensed if he allowed it. Alongside this, he posed the more practical consideration that Agrippina would only become more hostile if he allowed Seianus' marriage, as it would split the imperial house in two, spurning the marriage of Nero Caesar to Julia Livia. Tiberius's arguments were incorrigible, as the recent betrothal of Junilla to Drusus Caesar had previously drawn their ire, and Augustus had also chosen not to marry his daughter to an equestrian. Taken aback, Seianus quickly resorted to changing tactics, interpreting Tiberius's statement that he would not oppose the marriage if these obstacles could be overcome. Thus, he began to persuade Tiberius that a retreat to the countryside was in the princeps' best interests, since he was not needed in Rome in person, which would give Seianus nearly exclusive control over access and communication with Tiberius. After an embarrassing trial of maestas against the rhetor Votianus Montanus in 25 CE brought forth shocking accusations against the princeps, Tiberius stated he would seek to disprove them immediately. Tiberius moved forward with his plans to withdraw from public life. This was exacerbated by his feud with Agrippina, who had fallen ill and begged Tiberius to provide her a husband, which Tiberius knew would cause the same problems as allowing Livilla to marry Seianus. Seianus ordered his agents to allow rumors of Tiberius's intent to poison Agrippina to reach her ears, prompting her and Tiberius to face off at dinner, where he offered her an apple after he noticed she refused to eat. When the story spread through Rome, Tiberius's popularity plummeted once more. In 26 CE, Tiberius finally decided to withdraw, first to Campania and then to Capri. Seianus was now in control. With Tiberius now only receiving the information that Seianus filtered to him, it became easy to disparage and discredit Nero Caesar as lethargic, indulgent, obstinate, and incapable of his position. By early 27 CE, Seianus was able to use his troops and agents to spy on Agrippina and Nero Caesar, placing Agrippina under house arrest by the end of that year, and began preparing to proceed against Nero. He turned himself into a consul maker, moved to bring charges of maiestas against Titius Sabinius, the last of his major opponents, and brought the claims of tyranny by Tiberius to its final ugly head. With the help of 4 ex-praetors seeking consulship, Seianus brought the charges against Sabinius with Tiberius's approval via letter, and he was immediately condemned to death and dragged out of the Senate chambers, screaming that he was a New Year's sacrifice to Seianus. When news reached the streets, the city was paralyzed with terror. Conversely, the Senate was paralyzed not by their rapidity of action against Sabinius, but by their inability to act without Tiberius. When the Germanic Frisi tribe revolted that year, they were unable to act, so they begged Tiberius and Seianus to come to Rome to handle affairs. Reluctantly, Tiberius was dragged out of Capri to Campania, where he held court and married Germanicus' daughter Agrippina to Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus. The elderly emperor then once more returned to Capri. When Livia Drusilla finally died the next year in 29 CE, he excused himself from her funeral and postponed the execution of her will. Her death, however, opened the door for Seianus to finally move to eliminate Agrippina and Nero Caesar, as she was the only power left holding him in check. Days later, charges against Agrippina and Nero Caesar were brought before the Senate, where Agrippina was accused of ambition and arrogance beyond her station, and Nero of dissolution in his lifestyle. However, Tiberius had given no instructions on how they were to be punished, expecting the Senate to infer his wishes, and leaving the body paralyzed. Meanwhile, on the steps of the Forum, the city's populace had organized a massive demonstration, bearing images of Agrippina and Nero Drusus, and exclaiming that the letter was a forgery. Seianus was able to twist these circumstances in his report to Tiberius, claiming that the Senate had spurned the princeps and the populace of Rome was in open revolt. Tiberius then remanded both the city and the Senate in a subsequent letter, but stated the fate of Agrippina and Nero was solely in his hands. By 30 CE, the Senate initiated legal proceedings against the two, and they were declared public enemies and exiled. Nero was sent to the island of Pontia for imprisonment, and Agrippina to Pandateria, where her mother Julia had been exiled before her. Meanwhile, Seianus moved against Drusus Caesar, instigating an affair with his wife Aemilia Lepida and using her to bring charges against him. Like his family, he too was declared a public enemy and imprisoned in the palace in Rome. Meanwhile, Seianus was now in complete control, receiving sacrifices at his statues, his birthday being publicly celebrated, and he had finally betrothed himself to Livia Julia. Finally, in the year 31 CE, Seianus was to be elevated to consul alongside Tiberius, and to celebrate, Seianus arranged a popular election on the Aventine Hill. The only power he had left to seize was the Tribunician power. Seianus' downfall would be swifter than his rise, but the reasons elude historians. Tiberius' own brief autobiography claims that he had Seianus executed after discovering he had plotted against the sons of Germanicus, but Nero Caesar was executed after Tiberius had become suspicious, and Drusus after Seianus was already dead. While the official line was that Seianus was planning to assassinate Tiberius and Gaius Caligula, this could not have been the case, as Seianus was entirely reliant on Tiberius to stay in power, as evidenced by the fact no military commanders, governors, and only one man of consular rank committed themselves to the cause. It is unlikely even the Praetorians would have followed Seianus against Tiberius, as they immediately transferred their allegiance to his successor Macro. It is therefore likely that Seianus' target was not Tiberius, but Gaius, who was next in line for removal with the rest of Germanicus' family out of the way. It was a letter from Antonia, Gaius Caligula's grandmother, which instigated Tiberius's suspicions against Seianus, and Tiberius had Gaius moved to Capri in late 30 CE. Tiberius then proceeded against Seianus in a masterstroke of deception, sending confounding and conflicting letters to confuse both the Senate and Seianus alike, at one moment praising him, at another denouncing. He intervened in the trial of Lucius Aruntius, halting Seianus' proceedings, but still punishing the defendant, granting Seianus proconsular imperium upon his resignation of the consulship, but also ordering all sacrifices to mortals ceased, and no honours bestowed upon the princeps' person, so Seianus would not receive these privileges. He kept Seianus lulled into a false sense of security by circulating rumours he would soon be granted tribunician power. But by the end of 31 CE, Tiberius struck with rapidity, sending the new Praetorian prefect, Macro, from Capri to Rome, entering the city and moving with the authority of Tiberius's consular appointee, Memmius Regulus, and the prefect of the Night Watch, Publius Gracchinius Laco. At dawn, the Senate was gathering outside the Temple of Apollo, where Macro met Seianus on the steps, claiming to bear official news of his granting of tribunician power. Elated at the news, Seianus entered the temple, and Macro dismissed the Praetorian detachment which guarded the structure, sending them with an official letter revealing his new position to the soldiers, and granting them a large donative. The temple was then surrounded with vigiles under Laco's command, and Macro left for the Praetorians' camp. Inside the temple, a letter was read from Tiberius before the Senate, ordering the arrest of Seianus. Memmius and Laco imprisoned Seianus and his associates, while mobs of vigilantes rioted in the streets of Rome, demanding revenge on Seianus. That afternoon, the Senate voted to condemn Seianus to death, and the order was carried out immediately, with his body dragged to the Gemonian stairs to be humiliated by the population of the city. Subsequently, a swift series of decrees was issued following Seianus' execution. Oaths could only be sworn in Tiberius' name, and excessive honours were banned, with Tiberius again turning down the acclamation of Pater Patriae. Macro's new position was rewarded with awards, and Laco was appointed quaestor, but both men also refused, not willing to risk being seen as following in Seianus' footsteps. A witch hunt spread across Rome, as Seianus' followers turned on each other, many being lynched by the mob, others condemned to death or committing suicide. Tiberius still refused to leave his villa on Capri, despite his own letter ordering Memmius to bring him from the island to Rome, ready to depart at a moment's notice to the head of the provincial armies, and ready to release Drusus Caesar and appoint him princeps as a last resort against a coup by Seianus. Seianus' son, Strabo, was executed on October 24th, and Epicata, his divorced wife, committed suicide 2 days later, after sending a letter claiming that Seianus had poisoned the younger Drusus. Seianus' last 2 children were executed later in December. The betrayal and horrific downfall of Seianus had shaken Tiberius to his core, leaving him a callous, deluded man who once more retreated into solitude. It was only the success of Augustus's institutions that kept Rome functioning through this difficult period of imperial infancy. Next time, we'll delve into Tiberius's final years, his continuing treason trials, and the succession of Caligula. If you don't want to miss that and many other historical videos, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.